Welcome to Hatman Strikes Back Daily Boxing News. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. We've got a few things to talk about. In fact, I'll do a little rundown of the points of discussion in this stream. We'll be talking about Turki Al-Sheikh trolling Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom ahead of this Eubank Jr. Conor Benn fight. He also met up with Simon Jordan and had some interesting comments there, amusing comments. We'll be talking about Shakur Stevenson reportedly leaving Matchroom, also leaving his manager James Prince, and signing with Lou Deella, of all people. We'll talk about Edgar Balanga, also leaving Matchroom and signing with PBC, and his matchup with Hamza Shiraz. Very interesting that Shiraz has decided to take that fight. We'll be talking about a little bit about Conor Benn taking a lie detector test. Ring Magazine did this pretty amusing thing where they had Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. doing lie detectors. We'll be talking about the undercard on this Eubank Jr. Conor Benn fight, which features Chris Billum Smith versus Brandon Glanton, Vidal Riley versus Chev Clark, Anthony Yard versus Lynden Arthur 3, Smith versus McKenna, and also why there are so few fights, at least according to BoxRec, on that show. I'm not complaining because so many shows have got a bunch of filler. This show, they seem to be sticking to big fights. Well, not necessarily big fights, but interesting fights rather than putting all the filler on there. So yeah, let's get into it. But before we do, quick roll call. Shout out to Gaz for the super chat early. He says, hey man, are you looking forward to I Am Legend 2? Not at all. I didn't watch I Am Legend 1. I'm not a fan of Will Smith. Never have been, other than when he was in The Fresh Prince. I liked him in The Fresh Prince. But other than that, no interest in Will Smith movies. And that would include I Am Legend 2. But shout out to guys for the super chat. We got Brad in the chat. We got Crip Talk. We got Abudi. We got HB. Richard, Ming. Mr. Luca as always. Set. Jazz. We got Kagana. We got Jelly Mold. We got Jonathan Doyle. We got Ian. Good evening. Liberty Taker. We got G. High Roll Protagonist, of course. Jay Silver. Earth Summed Up. Yes, if everyone can stick a like on this stream, it will really be greatly appreciated. Helps with the visibility of this stream by way of the algorithm. Shout out to Sparks. Mark Birdle. Shout out to Mark. So let's get right into the points of discussion. First of all, Turki Al-Sheikh put this up on his Instagram page. He's a humorous individual. He likes to crack jokes, often at Eddie Hearn's expense. And in this case, at Ben Shalom's expense as well. As you can see, he says, I just arrived to London. I have a very big concern that this fight will not happen because of the drug test results of Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom. Out of Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom, which one do you think is most likely to, neither of them are athletes, so we don't need to worry about PEDs. What they take is their business. I'm just being facetious here, like Turki is, but which one, if they did do a, let's say, recreational drug test, who's more likely to test positive, in your view? Eddie Hearn or Ben Shalom? Who's more likely to be on the marching powder, the sticky green, or whatever else? Would it be Hearn or Shalom? Kyle says Ben. Callum says Eddie, of course. Anthony Joshua's Dark Room says, turkey roasting Eddie Hearn, as always. Aiden says, God, I wish Shalom would take something. Might make him less boring. All right. Okay, most people are saying Eddie Hearn, testosterone replacement therapy. They reckon he's on TRT. All right. So, Turkey put this post up as well on Instagram. It says, good meeting with my brother, Simon. We agreed on nothing. This was from earlier on today, meeting up with Simon Jordan. So Dan Rayfield put this tweet out. It says, in reporting on the July 12 card with Shakur Zapida, source with knowledge of specifics told me Shakur split from Matchroom and his manager James Prince, has hired Lou Deella as his promoter for the event to keep an eye on stuff, handle behind the scenes stuff, maybe do media or do some media, okay? Now, a lot of people are saying that that's a very strange move by Shakur Stevenson. Lou Deella is not a factor in the boxing promotional game these days, but maybe he comes at a cheaper price. You know, a lot of fighters are more business savvy than you think. And as the tweet from Dan Rayfield says there, he's hiring him for this fight. So it isn't necessarily a long-term deal with Lou Deella, but maybe for this particular fight, it makes sense financially. And the fight is going to be in the United States, presumably. I think it is, the July 12th card. Yeah, it is United States, I think. So Lou Deella knows the landscape of boxing over in America. Maybe he knows it a little bit better. Maybe he's got better relationships with the boxing establishment in the United States than Eddie Hearn does. So there you go. But anyway, this account called The Boxing Enthusiast put out some different information regarding Shakur Stevenson's move, confirming he has split with Matchroom and has hired Lou Deella as his promoter, but will still be managed by James Prince. So again, contradicting what Dan Rayfield said, because he said that he's splitting with James Prince. But the Boxing Enthusiast account says that no, he's going to still be managed by James Prince. And it says source Dan Rayfield. So I'm not sure if they've got their wires crossed, but my reading of Dan Rayfield's tweet, as you can see here, split from Matchroom and his manager James Prince. I don't see how you could deduce from this that he's kept James Prince. So make it out what you will. And this is a bit of humor here. But somebody reminded Lou Deella on Twitter, Instagram, wherever this was put up, of something he said a couple of years back, right? Actually, well, just last year, 7th of July, 2024. He said, as good as he is, I just don't enjoy watching Shakur fights. Good night. Now, Lou Deella is certainly not the only promoter who's been caught out in this way. Eddie Hearn's been caught out in this way a number of times. Most recently, one of the more funny examples was when Sam Jones was caught out. Obviously, he's a boxing manager rather than a promoter, but he was caught out saying disparaging things about Jack Catterall. I think it was in a phone conversation or a voice message or something, or a voice note to Regis Prograis a year or two ago. And then fast forward to the current day, he's now managing Jack Catterall. So he was embarrassed at that press conference when Regis Prograis played the voice note or the voicemail, whatever it was. You would think that these promoters and managers will be a bit more careful and a bit more measured about the things they say about fighters. Now, the fighters may know the game. They may understand that, okay, yeah, this guy was slagging me off a couple years back when he was promoting one of my rivals. Now he's singing my praises because I've hired him as my promoter or hired him as my manager. The fighters might understand the way the game works, but the public are just going to look at you as somebody who's totally disingenuous when you get caught out like this. They're not going to believe your hype talk, you know? But I guess it's a symptom of being a boxing promoter because a lot of their job is to talk. And because they talk so much, they lose track of their own BS. Yeah. And in this case, it's not even BS from Lou Deella. I think he was sincere because Shakur Stevenson is a cure for insomnia. He is terribly boring. But again, just being wise and future-proofing yourself a little bit. You don't want to make too many statements like this about top fighters because you never know when an opportunity might arise for you to promote one of them. So there you go. But then again, Lou Deella is such a non-factor in boxing these days. Perhaps he never thought he would get the opportunity. But yeah, I always find it funny when promoters put their foot in it the way that Lou Deella has here. I'll come onto the chat when I've just run through these boxing stories and topics. So hold tight, everyone in the chat, especially if you've donated via Super Chat. I'll be with you in a moment. So you can see here, breaking news, Edgar Balanga is heading to the big bags, pause, and everything points to that his next step will be with Premier Boxing Champions. The chosen one will be signing a deal that would change the course of his career. You know, a lot of people find it weird that Edgar Balanga kind of turned on Matchroom and has apparently left them and he's looking to sign with PBC. And in this post, they're saying it would change the course of his career because Matchroom got him the Canelo fight. They delivered the fight that he wanted all along. So for them to deliver and for him to turn around and act the way he's acting, a lot of people are puzzled, but we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. We don't know the exact nature of the business arrangement between Matchroom and Edgar Balanga. Maybe there are things about the deal that are not great from Matchroom's side. But then again, I'm very cognizant of the fact that a lot of fighters are very egotistical. Edgar Balanga certainly comes across that way. He looks at himself as some type of celebrity and superstar. He likes wearing the big chains with all the diamonds and what have you. He comes to the ring looking like some kind of rapper. He walks around looking like a rapper. And maybe in his mind, he's a legend, you know? When you're dealing with someone like that, and there are many fighters, particularly in the United States, who have that kind of mindset, it can be difficult getting them to see sense. Teofimo Lopez, at least my perception of him, is that he's a bit like that. Tank Davis, etc., etc. They can get a bit diva-ish. So who knows what's going on with Edgar Balanga, but apparently looking to sign with PBC. And this is a tweet here from Mike Coppinger. Edgar Balanga, Hamza Shiraz, and Shakur Stevenson, William Zepeda will be for the WBC 135-pound title. Let me repeat all that. Edgar Balanga, Hamza Shiraz, and Shakur Stevenson, William Zepeda, WBC 135-pound title fight will take place July 12 in NYC, Ring Magazine has learned. Alberto Puello, Sobrio Matias, WBC 140-pound title fight, and David Morrell versus Imam Katayev on the stacked undercard. And here you can see the main fights on that show. Balanga, Shiraz, Stevenson, Zepeda, Puello Matias, Morrell, Katayev. What do you guys think of this lineup? The Balanga-Shiraz fight is a surprise to me. The others are not a surprise. They're some good fights, but the fact that Shiraz, in his first fight at 168, is choosing to take on a big, hard-punching, young super middleweight in Edgar Balanga, whose only defeat is to Canelo Alvarez, and that fight went the distance. And he gave a good account of himself in that fight, Edgar Balanga. He lost, but he gave a good account of himself. For that to be Shiraz's first fight at 168 is an eyebrow raiser. I mean, he's coming off a loss to Carlos Adames, a small man, a guy who started his career at welterweight. So what's that really all about? And I asked this question in one of my recent live streams. I'll ask it again here. Has Hamza Shiraz sparred Edgar Balanga in the past? Because for those of you who don't know, yes, Hamza Shiraz is a British fighter, but his training has been based in the United States for a number of years. Spars out there, he's got an American-based coach, etc. That, to me, would be the only thing that would really make sense of this move from Shiraz's perspective. I mean, perhaps Turkey offered Shiraz a load of money, made him an offer he couldn't refuse financially. But that aside, maybe Shiraz has sparred Balanga and did well enough in that sparring to give him the confidence to fight him in his first contest at 168. Is that what's going on? If anyone has any information on that, please enlighten us in the chat or in the comments section. Then you got Shakur Stevenson, William Zepeda. I've spoken about this fight several times before. It's a good fight. Zepeda has had some pretty good prep for this fight, taken on Tevin Farmer a couple of times. Not that Tevin Farmer is Shakur Stevenson, but similar styles and a similar puzzle that Zepeda will have to try and solve. Puello versus Matias. Again, good fight. Puello, tricky fighter from the Dominican Republic, going up against Sabrina Matias from Puerto Rico. Matias, crude, strong, throws a lot of shots. So that should be an interesting contest. David Morrell versus Imam Katayev. I've never actually seen Katayev fight, at least not to my best recollection. Off the top of my head, I don't recall ever seeing him fight. If I have, it was on an undercard somewhere and I've already forgotten about it. So you guys fill me in the comments about Imam Katayev, whether you think he's a good fighter or whatever. So another bit of humor here. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's on the Ring Magazine's YouTube channel. Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. both took lie detector tests. They were asked a bunch of questions, and unsurprisingly, they did not ask Conor Benn whether he knowingly ingested a performance-enhancing substance. And if that's the reason that he failed the 2 PED tests. And everybody in the comments is basically complaining about that. So, I mean, like I say, you wouldn't expect them to ask that question. Conor Benn would never have agreed to do the test if that type of question was coming. In my opinion, anyway. If he is completely innocent, then of course he wouldn't fear the test. Not that lie detector tests are foolproof. They're not. They're not 100% accurate. That's why they don't use them to convict people generally. But they can be a useful guide. So there was a funny moment during Conor Benn's lie detector test where he was asked whether he would trade his boxing career for a successful career in Hollywood. He said no, but the lie detector guy said that's incorrect. Based upon your heart rate and whatever else the lie detector measures, we find you to be lying. According to the lie detector test, he would happily trade in his boxing career for a career as a Hollywood actor, a successful, A-list Hollywood actor. So, yeah, make of that what you will. Moving on from the Conor Benn lie detector test. This is the card at least the main fights on the card. There might be some preliminary bouts that don't appear on BoxRec, but that'd be quite unusual, to be honest. They normally do appear on BoxRec. But these are the main fights on the card. There's 5 of them. Starting off with Chris Billam-Smith versus Brandon Glanton. In fact, Brandon Glanton, for those of you who are not familiar with him, I'm not massively familiar with him myself, but I do know some of the names that he's been in there with. And you look at his record. Let me get his BoxRec up here. Obviously, there's only a certain amount that you can deduce looking at somebody's record, right? You really need to see them in the ring. And I may have seen him fight. In fact, I think I probably have seen him fight. But anyway, some of the names that you will recognize and the results that are somewhat interesting here on his record, you guys won't be able to see it on your screen, but I can see it here on mine. He won a split decision over Opochi, a tough Nigerian fighter who had a real close fight with Chev Clark a year or so ago. That was in the United States. Some of you guys may remember that fight. Opochi, a big puncher, very physically strong, tough, bit crazy. And Glanton managed to drop him in the 6th round and win a split decision over him over 10 rounds. That was back in 2021. His 2 losses were to David Light. He dropped a split decision to David Light over 10 rounds. He actually dropped Light in the 10th. And a guy called Soslan Asparov. He dropped a majority decision in that fight. That was in 2023. And since then, he's had 3 wins on the bounce, including in his last fight, a win over a fighter called, God, I'm going to struggle with his first name here. Is it Alexei? I think it's just a different way of spelling Alexei. Alexei Egorov, I think that's how you pronounce it. So he stopped him in the 11th. Before that, which was last year. Before that, he also fought last year against a guy called Emil Markic. That was in France, and he stopped him in the 2nd round. So Brandon Glanton, 33 years of age, 5'11", so he's a shorter, cruiserweight, 20-2, 17 KOs. Seems like a tough guy, but limited, just going off his record. Going up against CBS, who could also be described as a tough guy, but limited. He can punch, he's big and strong, he's got plenty of heart, but he isn't the most skilled fighter you've ever seen. And we saw evidence of that, of course, when he came up short in the unification with Gilberto Ramirez. Ramirez relieved him of his belt. So this should be quite an interesting fight between 2 strong cruiserweights. We're going to look to let their hands go. Let me know how you guys see this fight going. In fact, we'll turn this over to the chat room right now. See what you guys make of it. AJ says, man lost to David Light. He did. And incidentally, I think I did mention this in a video way back. Lawrence Okolie actually ended David Light's career. David Light hasn't fought since because he had some type of, thankfully, relatively minor brain injury, but it was a brain injury nonetheless. And I think that's put an end to his career. He had some kind of minor bleed on the brain. So yeah, his career is finished. He'll never be licensed again. Aiden says, right hand to God. I never said that right before the voicemail. Played was a crease. Yeah, that was incredibly embarrassing for Sam Jones. These managers and promoters are so slippery. It's actually funny to see them get exposed like that. Iron Mike says, Groves not backing down to senior. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. As he had some type of interview with senior. Shout out to Jake. Jelly Mode says, I was surprised to hear of Yard Arthur 3. Is this really a fight people want to see? Definitely not. We'll come on to that in a second. All right, so people not particularly interested then in Chris Billam-Smith versus Brandon Glanton. We'll move on to this fight here. Now, personally, I'm really interested in this fight. Vidal Riley going up against Chev Clark. Vidal Riley, of course, unbeaten 12-0. Chev Clark now 10-1, coming off the loss to Leonardo Mesquia in his last contest. That was a real tough fight against a very, very strong fighter in Mesquia. I mean, very, very physically strong. Chev Clark is a big, muscular, bullish cruiserweight, but Mesquia really beat him at his own game. I mean, Chev Clark is a bit more dimensional than Mesquia, and he can box on the back foot when he has to, but that's not his preferred way of fighting. And he had to revert to plan B against Mesquia because Mesquia was just too strong in the pocket for him. Whenever he stood and traded, at least in the early rounds, he was coming off second best. He got hurt. He got dropped by Mesquia early in that one. And Mesquia came out with a victory. Chev Clark was upset. He felt like he got hard done by on the cards. I personally didn't. And at the end of the day, you can only ride your luck for so long, unless you're some massive ticket seller who's consistently going to get the rub of the green in close fights. Then you can only ride that kind of luck for so long. And what I'm referring to is Chev Clark's previous fight against Apochi. Apochi felt he was hard done by. Apochi felt as though he should have got the decision and that Clark got the rub of the green because he was the A-side in that fight. And you can make that argument. I thought that one was close too. But against Mesquia in another close fight, Clark didn't get it. He was bitterly disappointed. I don't think he even stayed around to do an interview in the ring, from what I can remember. So anyway, he gets an opportunity to bounce back real quick here against Vidal Riley. I'm so glad that this fight is happening rather than the original fight, which was supposed to be Vidal Riley versus Isaac Chamberlain. Nothing against Isaac Chamberlain, but I just think stylistically this fight is far more interesting. You got Riley of Jamaican descent, just like Chev Clark, who was actually born in Jamaica, I believe. It's a fight I've wanted to see for a long time. I personally think Vidal Riley is very talented. I think he's actually underrated in terms of his talent by British boxing fans. The question I have about Vidal Riley is about his internal constitution. Because as much as he's got height, reach, hand speed, power, coordination, balance, etc., you can fight inside and outside. As much as he has all these attributes, I keep going back to this, but I won't get it out of my head until he passes this test against a different opponent. But when he fought Mikhail Lawal, Vidal Riley was unfathomably negative. He fought Mikhail Lawal as if it was a prime Mike Tyson he was in there against. And this is the very same Mikhail Lawal who was actually bullied for 10 or 12 rounds by Isaac Chamberlain. Isaac Chamberlain's not a big puncher, folks, and he's a small cruiserweight. If Isaac Chamberlain can go in there and bully Mikhail Lawal for whatever it was, 10 or 12 rounds, why is Vidal Riley fighting him like, as I say, he's in there with a prime Mike Tyson or a prime George Foreman or something? He needs to stay away, and like, it was a bit over the top in terms of the tactics from Vidal Riley. Now, after the fight, it may have been Riley's dad or Riley himself or somebody from the team was claiming that he was injured. He had a bust hand or a hurt arm or something like that. And I guess that's what they were blaming the performance on, the extremely cautious performance. Well, we shall see. Because one thing that Chev Clark will do is he will find out whether you've got the heart for this game. Because Chev Clark is a tough guy. He's got a hardcore mentality. He's blood and guts. And if you don't have the internal constitution, he's going to take you into deep waters and drown you. And this is one of the reasons that I think this fight is interesting. If Vidal Riley, there could be a situation where Riley is just so much better than Clark that Clark can't get past the talent to test his heart? That's a possibility. But I suspect Clark probably does have enough to get past the talent of Riley, at least in spots, and really ask him some serious questions. I'm hoping that's the case because, again, I want to see a good fight. And yeah, I find this an interesting one. But what say you in the comments? There's not much difference between them in terms of height. Vidal Riley listed at 6'1". Chev Clark listed at 5'11 and a half. Shout out to Gaz for the super chat. He says, Light robbed Glanton and Asperov popped for 6 years. Okay, didn't know that. Shout out to Gaz for another super chat. Salute to Fight Sport Talk. Big up Charles B. Jay Silver. Mark Hatch says, did Vidal leave Mayweather's gym? Who's his current trainer? Last I checked, his dad was training him. Last I checked. Jay Silver says, I think Vidal outboxes him. King says people are underestimating him because he trained KSI. Maybe. Maybe that hasn't really helped his, maybe it hasn't really helped the perception that the public have of him because they don't see him as a serious boxing person. They associate him with KSI and misfits and whatnot. But yeah, I've got, in case I haven't already said, Vidal Riley winning this fight. I think he outboxes Chev Clark too and takes a decision. I wouldn't even rule out a Vidal Riley stoppage or knockout win because if Chev Clark is getting outboxed, he's going to force the issue. He's got a lot of heart, Chev Clark. He's not going to stand on the outside and just allow Vidal Riley to do his thing. He's going to push the pace. He's going to take it to him. And he's going to take risks. He's going to take chances if he feels like he's falling behind on the cards. So I'm looking forward to this one. Then, as somebody alluded to earlier on in the chat, we got Anthony Yarde versus Lynden Arthur 3, a trilogy fight that nobody asked for. Not quite as bad as Tyson Fury Derek Chisora 3, because that was one that, again, really nobody asked for. But in this case, with Yarde and Arthur, at least the first fight was competitive. At least the first fight was a victory for Arthur. Anthony Yarde came back with a revenge win in their rematch, so this is the decider. Again, not that anybody really cares about the fight, other than maybe the fighters themselves and their teams, the most hardcore of fans that each of them have. But outside of the inner circle, nobody was calling for this fight. Nobody wanted this fight. But as somebody, I forget who, said in the build-up to this, it might have been Andy Clark on Sky, because there are such low expectations for this contest, it might actually surprise us pleasantly. Because the second fight, of course, was a demolition job. Anthony Yarde just walked straight through Lynden Arthur. Since then, Lynden Arthur has gone on to fight Dimitri Bivol, among other people, and that went the distance. Will he be better prepared for an Anthony Yarde onslaught? Anthony Yarde, for some reason or another, maybe because he'd lost several family members, maybe he wasn't in the right headspace, decided to box Lynden Arthur the first time they fought. On the outside, he was coming forward, but he wasn't applying intense pressure. He was trying to think and box too much with Arthur, and that gave Lynden Arthur the time and space to get his jab off, and that's Lynden Arthur's best punch by a mile, is the left jab. So it was a curious strategy from Anthony Yarde in that first fight, which horribly backfired. Man thought he was Floyd Mayweather or something, and he really wasn't. Okay, never has been. But that's the kind of mindset he went in there with, like he wanted to win the fight in a very clean way where he gets hit with minimal shots. The second time, he got it right. He went in there and got stuck in. He didn't try and box with Lynden Arthur. He just tried to physically impose himself. And he did the business early. Presumably, he'll be looking to do the same thing here in the trilogy match with Arthur. But yeah, like most people, I'm not particularly interested in this fight, but who knows? Maybe it pleasantly surprises us. Then you got Liam Smith taking on Aaron McKenna. Not particularly interested in this fight either, to be honest. I'm not too familiar with McKenna. He's an unbeaten Irish fighter, 19-0, 25 years of age, going up against the veteran Liam Smith, former world champion from the Smith fighting family, been around the block, been there, seen it, done it, bought the t-shirt several times over. 36 years of age now. This is his first fight since losing the rematch to Chris Eubank Jr. We'll see how much Liam Smith has left. He certainly looked bad in the Eubank Jr. fight, but he's the man with the experience here. And he can have no excuses because last time against Eubank Jr., he basically said that they rushed him into the ring. They didn't give him enough time to recover from his injury. But presumably that isn't the case this time. So we're really going to find out whether Liam Smith has got some fight left in him, or whether it's all gone as he takes on Aaron McKenna. And then top of the bill, of course, Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. I personally think that Eubank Jr. is going to win this fight. Probably on points, but I wouldn't rule out a late stoppage. There's a lot being made of the weight cut for Eubank Jr. And of course, weight can definitely impact a fighter's performance, especially at this age. Eubank Jr. is 35 now. So he can't weigh any more than 10 pounds over, roughly 10 pounds over the middleweight limit of 160 at somewhere like 8, 9 or 10 a.m. on the morning of the fight. So he has to keep his hydration limited up until the morning of the fight. He might even have to get up early to weigh himself before the check weight to make sure he can make the check weight. And if he can't, then he's going to have to sweat out some weight. So it's an inconvenience. Will it be so much of an inconvenience, as I say? And I forgot to mention, sometimes doing a check weight on the morning of a fight can mess with your sleep. Yeah? Because you may be worried about, will I make the weight, at this particular time? I have to get up an hour early to check my weight when I wake up, because if they're going to knock on my door at 8, 9 a.m., let me get up at 7. Some people deal with stuff like that very easily. Other people, it'll play on their mind and it'll bother them and they won't sleep that well. So it remains to be seen. You wouldn't have thought it would bother Eubank Jr. being as experienced as he is, but you never know. A lot of pressure on his shoulders because he's the bigger, more experienced man. On paper, he should be winning this fight. He's supposed to win this fight. But yeah, I think that he probably will. I'm picking him to win. On points, possibly a late stoppage. Conor Benn is fast compared to the opponents that Eubank Jr. is used to fighting, at least. He's coming up from welterweight, but his last couple fights were at junior middleweight. So he's fast, he's explosive, he's aggressive, he throws a lot of shots. And I think one of the challenges early on for Eubank Jr. will be trying to catch Conor Benn because he rolls underneath shots. He's got fast, frenetic head movement when he's coming at you. So I think the early rounds will be a matter of Eubank Jr. finding ways to try and slow Conor Benn down, slow down his attack, slow down his assault, such that he can start catching him with shots. Because I do think Conor Benn's going to be quite difficult to catch in the early rounds. You might see Conor Benn win the early rounds because of that. Eubank Jr. might be the one who's more easy to hit. He's going to have to use his legs a lot, I think, to stay away from Conor Benn, tie him up on the inside, try and shut down his offense and frustrate him. Once he's frustrated him and got Conor Benn to expend energy and get all the anger out of his system, that's when maybe after 4 or 5 rounds, Eubank Jr. I think will start to take over, use his jab, body shots, maybe push Conor Benn back in spots. And down the stretch, if he's landing consistently enough, maybe even get a stoppage himself. If I had to put money on it, as far as the Eubank Jr. method of victory, I'd probably say points. But I wouldn't rule out a late stoppage because, Conor Benn's never been in there with anyone as big, strong, or actually as good as Eubank Jr. before. Not that Eubank Jr. is some elite fighter, but compare him to the people that Conor Benn's fought, I'm going to say Eubank Jr. is better. Okay, Chris Algieri was a world champion once upon a time, but we're talking about a guy that moved up from 140, who was right at the end of his career. That guy is not formidable. That guy is not as formidable in the ring. That version of Algieri, nowhere near as formidable in the ring as Eubank Jr. is right now. So, yeah, Eubank Jr., for my money, by far the best opponent that Conor Benn will have faced as a professional. As aggressive as he may be, and explosive and what have you, where was his power against his last 2 opponents who he fought at 154? Where was this vaunted power that Eddie Hearn says is going to lay waste to Chris Eubank Jr. inside the first? In fact, Eddie Hearn keeps adding rounds on. First, he said it's going to be inside 3 rounds. Then he said it's going to be inside 4 rounds. Then he said it's going to be inside 5 rounds. The last interview I saw of Eddie Hearn, he said Conor Benn's going to do Eubank Jr. inside 6. So he keeps adding rounds on. It kind of reminds me of when Billy Joe Saunders fought Chris Eubank Jr. Billy Joe Saunders swore on his kids' lives that Eubank Jr. wouldn't go the distance with him. You guys remember that? Or was it that he wouldn't go the distance? I think he swore on their lives that he wouldn't go the distance, or that he would retire if he didn't stop Eubank Jr. Something like that. And of course, it did go the distance, and Billy Joe didn't retire after Eubank Jr. went the distance with him. So, look, boxing is full of surprises. We do see situations where a guy, based on his past form, doesn't seem like he's got the power to stop the guy he's about to get in the ring with, but it happens anyway. I'm well aware of that. I've been around long enough watching boxing for many decades. We can't count it out completely, okay? But in my mind, at least, the probability is that Conor Benn is not going to knock Eubank Jr. out, that the fight will go into the second half, and if there's a stoppage, I reckon it's going to be Eubank Jr. tiring out the smaller man, using his jab on him, hitting him with body shots. I'm talking about straight shots to the body as well as hooks and uppercuts, bullying him here and there, and maybe stopping him. But I tend to lean more towards a Eubank Jr. points win. So that's what I'm going for in this fight. If Conor Benn does win, and yes, it's a possibility, surely Eubank Jr. is finished. Whereas if Eubank Jr. wins, Conor Benn can still go back down to 147 pounds. He's only 28 years of age. Go back down to 147 pounds and have a career. Because he'll just turn around and say, well, I was fighting 2 weights above my natural weight division. So it doesn't really mean anything if I lost up at 160. How many welterweights do you see making that jump and taking on those guys? That's what he can say afterwards, right? So the stakes are higher for Eubank Jr. here. He's got more to lose than Conor Benn has. And I think that's why Conor Benn and Eddie Hearn have been so keen on this fight for so long. They've really pushed the issue more than Eubank Jr. has, because they see more upside in this for themselves. We'll throw it back over to the chat then. See what you guys think of this. Feed Khabib in the chat. Carlton Palmer says the undercard is dead. Feed Khabib says Liam Smith out the ring for almost 2 years, 36, will probably lose, then have a laundry list of excuses like every other boxer does. Okay. Jake says, I quite often go back and listen to your old videos. They help me learn about historic fights. You mentioned a fight between Mark Wills and Greg Paige. You described the KO punch similar to a cricket bowl. That's right. It was a crazy knockout. And I think they'd fought before, but I only saw... No, I think I've seen both of their fights, but I saw the knockout that you're describing, I saw that at the time, back in the 90s. Was it late 80s or I think it was early 90s? But they did fight either before that or after that, and that one is also on YouTube. I'm going to look it up now. So if anyone's interested to see a crazy heavyweight knockout, I can direct you towards the correct fight, whether it was fight 1, 2, whatever it was. So I'm looking at Greg Page's record now. Obviously, Greg Paige, a heavyweight from the 1980s, held a version of the title at one point, famously dropped Mike Tyson in sparring ahead of the Buster Douglas fight. One of his best wins was over Tim Witherspoon, but that was very, very late on in his career when Tim Witherspoon made a comeback in the 90s. I'm looking for the Mark Wills. Okay, let's have a look here. So he was knocked out by Mark Wills in 1990. And that might be the fight that I spoke about regarding the crazy knockout. But he also fought... Oh, hang on. He also fought Mark Wills in 86. So I'm not sure which fight it was. I think it was the second fight. Yeah, I think it was the second fight. The one with the crazy, cricket bowl overhand right. I think was the second fight. The first fight says Paige was knocked down in rounds 1 and 9. Wills was down in round 2. Yeah, I don't think it was that one. It would have been the second one, which was a TKO for Wills in the 6th. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that would have been the one. But look it up, I'm sure they're on YouTube, and you'll see a crazy, crazy overhand right from Mark Wills, and down goes poor Greg Paige. He got knocked out badly a few times, Greg Paige. Razor Ruddock knocked him out as well. Carlton Palmer says, primed for an uppercut. I guess you're talking about Conor Benn. Anthony Joshua's Dark Room says, Eubank Jr. has ruined the career of our cult leader, Tyan Booth. You'd have to fill me in on that. What happened between Eubank Jr. and Tyan Booth? Shout out to James Clifford for the super chat. He says, is this an oversimplification? Eubank has nasty uppercuts and Benn only rolls under straight shots. Surely Eubank lands the uppercut for the KO. And shout out to Adam Folks for the super chat. He says, do you think it's possible the recent escalation in Eubank Sr. and Jr. fallout could be a mind game to lull Team Benn into a full sense of security? I had considered that possibility. I was watching Simon Jordan debate the fight with Duke McKenzie, Spencer Oliver, and Steve Collins. I think one of them kind of alluded to that at one point. Personally, I don't think so. It's possible, yeah. But if I were to put money on whether that's the case or not, I suspect that's not the case. Because Eubank Sr. is just a pathological attention seeker. And I think he is willing to drive a wedge between himself and his son because of the fact that his son won't allow him to hog the spotlight. I think that's how much the spotlight means to Eubank Sr. I think that's the kind of character he is. But yeah, shout out to Adam Fawkes. And regarding James Clifford's question, is it an oversimplification? I think it might be slightly, because it's all about timing, right? When you're looking for an uppercut, you have to throw the uppercut at the right time. You have to throw it at the right distance, a distance that's safe. And Conor Benn moves his head a lot, moves his feet a lot as well. And so while he might be more used to bobbing and weaving around straight shots, I'm trying to think of it from Eubank Jr.'s perspective. He's not used to somebody giving him that level of head movement and foot movement combined. So I think it will take a while for Eubank to time an uppercut, because Conor Benn is frenetic. He's like the Energizer Bunny in there, the way he's moving around and throwing shots from here and there and everywhere. And he comes in, at times anyway, at angles. He doesn't always just come straight at you. He'll pick an angle and then he'll dart in and start attacking and then roll underneath counters and whatnot. Benn can be reckless. We've seen that in fights. But I think you're going to have to frustrate him a bit to draw the mistakes out. So I think in the early rounds, Conor Benn is going to be relatively dangerous as a blown-up welterweight could be. I don't think it will necessarily just be one Eubank Jr. uppercut and the fight's done. I don't think Eubank Jr. is that kind of puncher, but I think it will be, if Eubank Jr. does stop Conor Benn, a wearing down process. Frustrate him, tie him up, stick a jab on him, hit him with some body shots, take his best punches away from him, and then maybe actually get physical. Eubank Jr. is the bigger guy. He can fight a physical fight. We've seen that many times with Eubank Jr., where he can get in on you and start mauling you in a clinch. And if he starts doing that with Conor Benn, surely that favors Jr. So I think it will probably be a wearing down process. Will the uppercut be the shot that eventually gets Benn? Yeah, it could well be, because that's Eubank Jr.'s favorite shot. But I think a wearing down process will have to occur first to take some of Conor Benn's movement away, the head movement and the foot movement. But yeah, shout out to James Clifford for the super chat. That's the way I see it. Crip Talk says, George Groves did actually pose the question to Senior and asked him if he was so against it because it wasn't his show, so to speak. And how did Eubank Senior take that question? I can't imagine he took it very well. Feed Khabib says, Conor Benn is such an emotional hothead. I can see him gassing himself and having a huge adrenaline dump after 5 or 6 rounds. It's possible. King says, I've never heard someone from Peckham speak like Chris Eubank Sr. Yeah, well, he's trained himself to talk like that, right? Casa says, really hard to get behind this fight. Maybe it's just me. There was a bare knuckle event in Cardiff last week with a 20,000 audience, 20,000 attendance. Madness. Wow. That's impressive. I've never heard of that. I'll have to look that one up. I'm sure the tickets were cheaper than a typical boxing show, but still, it's impressive. And as far as it's hard to get behind this fight, no, I agree with you. I'm covering this fight more so because I want the views. Just to be completely honest. If there wasn't a bunch of views to be had, then I wouldn't be doing so much coverage for this fight, and I probably wouldn't do a live stream during the fight. Might make a post fight or something. But there's a lot of interest, so there you go. I can't miss up the opportunity. Miss on the opportunity. It is what it is. I was never keen on this fight to begin with. The first time they tried to make it, I always felt like it was a weird fight. Crip Talk said that Eubank Sr. responding to Grove said, no, it's because it's against the rules. What rules? There are no rules against somebody moving up in weight. Eubank Sr. did it himself. He jumped up 2 weight classes to fight Carl Thompson. What rules is he talking about? And as far as the rehydration, well, as far as I'm aware, that's not against any British Boxing Board of Control rules. And the IBF have it as part of their rules as standard. So I'm not sure which rules Eubank Sr. is referring to. Anyway, shout out to Evil Uncle Phil for the super chat. He says, have you seen the video of Eubank Sr. dancing to Kumbaya? It's hilarious and will be dope to add to your background videos. He's such a narcissist. Yeah, I know the video you're talking about. He's in a room with a bunch of like kids and stuff, and there's quite a few videos where he's doing his very strange dancing, living his best life. But yeah, that's actually a good idea. I'll try to find a GIF for that particular clip and integrate it. Maybe I'll put that one up even on Fight Night when I do the live stream. Shout out to Evil Uncle Phil. I know exactly the clip you're talking about. Black Dynamite says the same Carl Thompson that Chisora kissed. No, that was Carl Baker that Chisora kissed. Carl Thompson was a former cruiserweight world champion who gave David Hay his first loss. Carl Thompson from Manchester. Is he from Bolton? Well, Bolton's in Greater Manchester, but actually, where's Carl Thompson from? Was he from like Moss Side, or was he from Greater Manchester like Bolton? I forget exactly where he was from. I'm sure he trained in Moss Side at a champs camp. But where's his actual hometown? Like, which part of the Greater Manchester area is Carl Thompson originally from? Why do I think he was from Bolton? I could be wrong. Maybe he's from South Manchester. Artak says, Senior will bring extra value. They missed the trick. If I was Turkey, I would have insisted on both dads being involved. Well, there's only so much you can do with Eubank Sr. He's a very stubborn man. Callum says Cheetham Hill, isn't it? Cheetham Hill is in North Manchester. Is that where Carl Thompson's from? Let me look it up. For some reason, I got a feeling he's from Bolton. I might be thinking of somebody else, another fighter from that era who is from there. Let's have a look. Just says Manchester, doesn't say specifically where on his Wikipedia page. Let's have a look at his box rec. If there's anybody from Manchester, from that era, maybe they'll be able to tell us in the chat. Yeah, residence Bolton. So he lived in Bolton. Maybe he wasn't originally from Bolton, but I do remember during his career, vaguely obviously, him being associated with Bolton. So I think he lived in Bolton, but was maybe from South Manchester originally, like, or somewhere in Manchester proper originally, but then moved out to Bolton and based himself there during much of his career. A Golf says, Nigel just said Conor stopped Skull in sparring. William Skull. Is that even true? Is it just hype talk? If it's true, it's an ominous sign for William Skull, isn't it? If he's getting stopped by a welterweight and he's preparing for Canelo, oh dear. Oh dear. Fee Khabib says Senior is a sheriff. He might get in the arena and arrest Hearn and Shalom for putting on such a despicable event. That's proper tickled me, that comment. Shout out to Fee Khabib for that comment. Yeah, he might come in with his sheriff's badge talking about, let's have some parliamentary procedure in here. Carlton Palmer says, remember Carl Thompson getting battered by a South African fighter for almost the entire fight and landed a KO punch from nowhere to come back and win. Yeah, that was Sebastian Rothman. I think it was Rothman, his name. Sebastian Rothman. I remember that fight. That fight, I think, was before the David Haye fight. It might have been the fight before he fought David Haye, was when he had that crazy fight with Sebastian Rothman. Shout out to Ocean Blue for the super chat. He says, what have I missed? We've spoken about, let me just do a quick rundown. We've spoken about Turkey trolling Eddie Hearn and Ben Shalom, also meeting up with Simon Jordan. We've spoken about Shakur Stevenson leaving Matchroom and signing with Lou Deella of all people. We've spoken about Balanga in his fight with Hamza Shiraz, signing with PBC. We've spoken about Conor Benn taking a lie detector. That was pretty funny. And the fights on this Eubank Jr. Ben card, CBS versus Brandon Glanton, Riley versus Clark, Yard versus Arthur 3, Smith versus McKenna, and obviously the main event. Shout out to KO for the super chat. He says, Nigel just said Conor stopped skull and sparring. Yeah, somebody said that a few moments ago. And my take on it is, if it's even true, because people are going to say all sorts of stuff, right? But if it's even true, I actually see that as more of a damning indictment of Skull than anything particularly positive for Conor Benn. William Skull is preparing to fight Canelo Alvarez. If you're getting stopped in sparring by an unproven welterweight with 16-ounce gloves on and headgear, and you're about to fight Canelo, the writing's on the wall already, isn't it? Mr. Grandy says, William Skull sparring Conor to replicate the speed of Canelo, plus they're the same height. Yeah, not good for Skull. Not good for Skull at all. In terms of if it's true that he got stopped by Conor Benn. Because I can assure you Canelo Alvarez hits a hell of a lot harder and he's a hell of a lot better. S says, it's funny how they didn't ask the golden question to Ben with a lie detector. Indeed, that's what everybody in the comments was saying. Shout out to Mark. Long time, Mark. He says, Carl Thompson trained in Moss Side but lives in Bolton. Yeah. There you go. I believe you're from the Manchester area, Mark, right? Old school, foundation. Yeah, I knew he trained in Moss Side at Champs Camp. But I just always had this thing in my head that he was associated with Bolton somehow. And is he originally from Bolton, though? Carl Thompson, or is he from somewhere else in Manchester proper? Dari says, not sure about Eubank's punch resistance, though. He seemed buzzed towards the end against Zerameta. We'll find out soon enough, right? If his punch resistance is compromised with the weight cut and the age and what happened to him against Liam Smith. We shall find out soon enough. But even if his weight, but even if his punch resistance is a bit compromised, I still think he beats Conor Benn, you know, personally. King says, who hits harder between Smith and Benn? I reckon probably Liam Smith. Ocean Blue says, should have asked Ben how many Spanish omelets he's eaten. All right, I'm going to call this guy Branche because his first name is crazy. He says, I want Inoue to fight Rigo next. Rigo is washed up beyond belief. Not sure why you'd want to see that fight. How old is Rigo now? Like 45? Iron Mike says, how much of Miller's physique is muscle and how much of it is fat? He's fat but muscular at the same time. Well, yeah, there's a lot of muscle under the fat, but if I had to estimate, I reckon if he comes in at 300 pounds, I'm going to say that there is at least 50 pounds of fat on him. Yeah, I reckon he's lugging around 50 whole pounds of fat. 40 pounds if we're going to be generous. I reckon it's more like 50 whole pounds of fat he's lugging around. So if you strip all the fat off so he's got abs, I reckon it'd be a 250 pound heavyweight. But I guess he doesn't have the metabolism for it. Mr. Grundy says, Rigo is 43 Cuban, which is actually 63 in normal years. There you go. Carlton Palmer says, a non-egg-fueled Conor doesn't punch as hard as Smith. I agree. Kyle says, can Vidal become world champion? I think so. Because, well, in fact, let me qualify that statement. Or that answer. It depends how long Jayo Pataya hangs around for. Because personally, I don't think anyone's going to beat Jayo Pataya for now at cruiserweight. He still has to get in the ring and prove it by becoming undisputed. But in my estimation, I wouldn't pick anybody to beat Opataya at this stage. If Opataya cleans up at cruiserweight and then moves up, the division's wide open again. And in a wide open division without Opataya, I can see Vidal Riley picking up a belt. I mean, we've got Badu Jack, who's like in his mid-40s, still a cruiserweight champion somehow. And by the way, his opponent, the guy he was supposed to be fighting, pulled out with an injury. So man like Badu Jack is champion, you know what I mean? At his ripe old age. And you've had fighters like Gulamarian, who Ramirez beat. He was no great shakes. The cruiserweight division minus Opataya is not that strong. So in that environment, yeah, I could see Vidal Riley picking up a belt. I could see it. Shout out to Ra Holcomb. Darry says, Hatman, who should Eubank fight after Benn? Well, it depends whether he wins or loses. If he wins, maybe fight Erislandy Lara or Carlos Adames. If he's really feeling brave, go ahead and fight Janabek, Halim Kanuli. So basically, one of the champions at 160 pounds is what he needs to be doing if he beats Conor Benn and beats him well. And as for Conor Benn, win or lose, he needs to target Granados at 147. And if he's successful there, try and square it with Boots Ennis if Ennis is still fighting at welterweight at that point. Mr. Grandy says, I think Conor Benn's style is very similar to Liam Williams, a guy Chris beat easily. I think Conor Benn's a lot faster than Liam Williams. Not as strong. Doesn't hit as hard as Liam Williams, but faster, moves his head a lot more. But aggressive like Liam Williams, for sure. Liam Williams' punch resistance, to be fair, was completely gone by the time he fought Eubank Jr. Something happened in that Andrade fight where he got dropped early and hurt early, where Liam Williams' as I say, punch resistance was never the same after that. Excuse me, Black Dynamite. Yes, I meant Barrios, not Granados. You already beat Granados, right? Thinking of the wrong guy. Yeah, that's right. Excuse me. Not Adrian Granados, who you already beat, but Barrios. Thank you for the correction. Mario Barrios, that's the one. Mario Barrios. Mr. Grandy says, Badu Jack beat Makabu. Canelo was going to move up to cruiserweight to fight. Yeah, and I always felt, and I said at the time when they were talking about Canelo fighting Makabu, I was one of the people saying Canelo wins that fight easy. There were other people saying, no, he's too big. I'm like, Makabu is not very good. For one, he's not a particularly big cruiserweight. And skill-wise, he's not even anywhere close to Canelo. Yeah, he's got physical strength and power and all that, but I always felt that was a fight Canelo could win and look good winning. But yeah, I remember that fight when Badu Jack beat a very punchy Ilunga Makabu. Very punchy. Black Dynamite says, Gilberto Ramirez is rumored to be fighting Dorticos next. Thoughts? I'd really rather it be Jayo Pataya. You know? I mean, Dorticos, we know his game and hits hard and all that type of stuff, but come on, man. Dorticos has seen better days. It might still be an entertaining fight because Dorticos is so spirited, but now we want to see the Jayo Pataya fight. Enough of all this messing about. King says, the Luke Partridge fanboy is still calling you out. I don't see too many of them turn up in the comments these days. Once or twice, yeah, there's a few stragglers here or there. But they've really had their wings clipped by Alexander Usyk. So when they do turn up, they often don't actually talk about Fury. They'll just turn up and start slagging off AJ. So weird. It's like I'm making videos, nothing to do with AJ, and they'll turn up slagging off AJ in the comments. I'm like, you do realize that I'm not an AJ fanboy. Well, obviously they don't realize. They don't understand the concept of my channel. They turn up and they hear a black guy talking about Anthony Joshua, and they don't even hang around long enough to listen to my reasoning over a number of videos. They just instantly assume, oh, you must be a diehard AJ fanboy the way that they are a diehard Tyson Fury fanboy. They just jump to these incorrect conclusions and go from there. So because of that, they occasionally just turn up in the comments of my videos that are nothing to do with AJ and start slagging AJ off, thinking it's going to like hurt me or something. These people are so weird. Jazz says, Partridge's Little Minions. Indeed. Partridge's Little Minions. They're basically taking copium right now. On a cope. Bexy says, does Tete beat Jake Paul? Probably not. But that'll be a competitive fight. Ebenezer Tete versus Jake Paul. It might be a bit competitive, but probably wouldn't beat Jake Paul, I don't think. Jake Paul should have enough. Island Grill says, where did this Partridge name come from? So I did a stream, however long it was ago, 7-8 months ago. I don't know how long it was ago, but I did a live stream And I shared a screenshot of a post that somebody put up in a boxing forum way back in 2013. It was about 2013 or maybe even earlier than that, right? But it was the BoxRec forum. And there was somebody who wrote a whole series of paragraphs about Tyson, John Fury specifically. It wasn't so much about Tyson. It was about John Fury. And he went into tremendous detail about different altercations that John Fury's been involved in. If that guy made it all up, then he needs a career as a scriptwriter for television or movies or something, because there was incredible detail in there. He gave names, dates, places, etc. And he named a middleweight. And I've heard other people allude to this as well, so it may well be verifiable. But there was a British middleweight who sparred John Fury, apparently, and beat him up in sparring. And John Fury got all irate after the spar and acted like he wanted to take it outside. And this middleweight apparently said, okay, yeah, let's take it outside. And when they went outside, John Fury just got in his van and drove away. I forget the name of this guy, but I've heard other people mention his name. Okay? And it was in that post on the BoxRec forum that this individual who was giving all this backstory about John Fury, where they claimed that the real name of the Fury family is Partridge, not Fury. And they said, I swear to God it's true, the real name of again, this was way back in 2013. This was or 2012 even. It was long before the public had turned against Tyson Fury. Do you know what I mean? It's when he was still kind of in their good graces. I think it was before the Klitschko fight. And this guy was saying that stuff about John Fury then. And I swear, I vaguely remember Peter Fury at one point in some interview actually confirming that there is partridges. Like one side of their family is actually called Partridge. Yeah, I vaguely recall Peter Fury actually confirming it. But that's where the Partridge name comes from anyway. King says the Furies are so pathetic, it's insane. Well, Tyson and John are pathetic. The rest of them, I don't think are too bad. You know, Peter's all right. Huey, he's a bit silly, but he's okay. Shane, for the most part, seems cool. But I know what you mean. Yeah, with Tyson and John, pathetic indeed, the way they carry on. Bexy says, why did White struggle so much against Tete? Because he's washed. And I think it might also be fair comment to say perhaps because he was also clean. You know, let's be real. Let's not beat around the bush here. Maybe Dillian Whyte was clean against Tete. But more than anything, I think because he's washed. Evil Uncle Phil says his name originally, according to his early school records, was Luke Partridge. You know, if that information ever came out, I would literally be banging on about it just to upset the Fury fanboys. I'll be making video and video and video and video. Because for some reason, as other people have mentioned in the comments, whenever you call him Luke Partridge, they get so triggered. Like, you don't even have to say anything else. Just refer to him by the name Luke Partridge and they will get so upset. And they're such hypocrites as well, right? Because they've been calling Anthony Joshua, for example, right? Because their whole world revolves around the Tyson Fury-Anthony Joshua rivalry. That's all that goes on in their heads, right? And so the Fury fanboys have been calling AJ Femi. Even Fury himself has been calling Anthony Joshua Femi. But Anthony Joshua's never been announced as Femi for any of his pro fights. Yet they still call him Femi. His real name's not Anthony, his name's Femi. And then they'll turn around and say, oh, you can't call Tyson Luke Partridge. That's not his name's Tyson. Okay, well, show me the fight where Anthony Joshua in a pro ring was announced as Femi Joshua. He never has been. So the hypocrisy is incredible. Lehman Chain says, Tete is a 60-year-old African uncle. Yeah? Ocean Blue says Partridge was actually called Luke before the Cunningham fight. That's correct. Was it the commentator or the announcer referred to him as Luke? That's right. Luke Tyson Fury. Internet Tough Guy says, I just watched Blackwell versus Eubank. That was a very good fight. That's one of Eubank's best performances. Obviously, it was British title level. But, yeah, Eubank went in that fight. I mean, the uppercuts were crazy. The way Eubank was spamming the uppercuts against Nick Blackwell, crazy. Casa says Peter seems like the only earner out of them. Maybe Shane. Well, Tyson obviously is the biggest earner, but aside from Tyson, yeah, Peter is a money man. He talks like a money man, thinks like a money man, and he's one of them kind of people where all his life, he's always found it easy to make money, legitimately or illegitimately. He was making money, according to him, legitimately, long before he got into the drug game. You know, he had businesses and this, that, and the other. But, I don't know, he wanted even more and went into the illegitimate world and made a load of money there too. Millions in the illegitimate world. So he's always been one of them individuals that just, like King Midas, whatever he touches turns to gold. Yeah, he's always had that knack. And making money a lot of the time in business is about being a people person. It's about knowing how to deal with people. So he's kind of a very tactful individual. He knows how to talk to people and build relationships and whatnot. Whereas John Fury is the exact opposite, isn't he? He doesn't know how to deal with people. He rubs everybody up the wrong way. He comes in trying to bully everyone, and yeah, that's not going to work in most legitimate business situations. Iron Mike says, do you think bodybuilders are compensating for not being able to fight, focusing on looking like they can instead? For a lot of them, yeah. Not all of them, but for a lot of them, 100%, that's why they do it. Absolutely, yes. And once they start taking roids, in particular, they really believe they can fight at that stage because of the way that roids boost your testosterone and all this type of stuff. Some of them become very aggressive and whatnot. Shout out to Jackie Boy Johnson. Evil Uncle Phil says, Luke Partridge, a.k.a. Tyson Fury, is a fake traveler who couldn't get proof of his Irish heritage. Yeah, that's why he got kicked off the Irish team, because he couldn't prove his heritage. Years later, he apparently did prove it, but this was when he was professional. I think that's why he fought for the Irish title as a professional. But as an amateur, he couldn't prove it. And if both of his parents are supposed to be from Ireland, it's really baffling how he couldn't prove it. Do you know what I mean? And when they did prove it, supposedly prove it, I don't think he proved his Irish heritage from his dad's side. I could be wrong. I think they proved it from his mum's side. Or it was a cousin or an uncle or something. I don't think they proved it through John. And John has always claimed that he was born in Ireland. And it might say on his box rec that he's born in Ireland now, but I did a stream or a video about this in the past, where previously, for the longest time, John's birthplace on box rec said Suffolk, right? In England. For years it said Suffolk, and I showed screenshots of where it used to say Suffolk, and then a couple of years ago it got changed to Galway, Ireland. And you know, with John Fury, he's such a liar that you really can't take anything he says at face value, can you? This is a guy who claims that he had 100 bare knuckle fights, one of them against an Irish bare knuckle champion in the 90s for 100 grand, but you can't remember the guy's name. Yeah, okay. Mr. Grandy says, I think this fight plays out similar to when Chris Jr. fought Morrison. Oh, you're talking about Marcus Morrison. That was an easy fight for Eubank Jr. You think it's going to be that easy? I don't know whether it'll be that straightforward, personally. But I do think Eubank Jr. will win. Rhubarb says, who did you prefer growing up, Nigel Benn or Chris Eubank Sr.? I liked both of them. I don't know who I liked more, but I liked both of them. I was never somebody that picked one or the other and therefore, you know, hated the other guy. I was never one of those people. I liked both of them. So I was never, you know, in one camp or the other. I found them both entertaining. I liked Eubank Sr.'s theatrics. And I liked the way that Nigel Benn fought. Wore his heart on his sleeve and left it all in the ring. So I preferred Nigel Benn in the ring from an entertainment perspective. But as characters, in fact, as a character, I think I preferred Eubank Sr. Just for the jokes, right? But as a fighter, I preferred Nigel Benn. So that's the answer I'll give. Because a lot of Eubank Sr.'s fights were boring. Just run around the ring and stick a jab and not really look to go for a stoppage, particularly after the Michael Watson rematch. A lot of his fights were really boring. There were still some entertaining ones, of course, but the majority of them were real stinkers. Internet Tough Guy says, who would you say is the Michael Jordan of boxing, apart from Ali? Are you talking about in terms of fame or in terms of dominance? In terms of dominance, the closest thing I've seen to Michael Jordan in boxing would be a prime Roy Jones. That's the closest thing I've seen. So Michael Jordan, prime Roy Jones. Because when Roy Jones was in there, literally none of his fights were competitive in his prime. None of his fights were competitive. He'd just go in there and take the absolute biscuit. You know, he'd have a laugh with great fighters and mock them while beating them, like James Toney, a prime James Toney, who he completely clowned, dropped and schooled for 12 rounds like it was nothing. Fighters who give other people issues, like Sugar Boy Malinga, for example, starched him. Sugar Boy Malinga fought Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, Sr., beat Nigel Benn in their rematch, swelled his whole face up. Roy Jones handled Sugar Boy Malinga like it was a walk in the park. You know what I mean? Roy Jones, in his prime, was a phenom. It literally didn't look fair. You know, when Roy Jones was in there in his prime, it was as if he was moving in fast forward while the opponents were going at normal speed. It was crazy. Literally like Neo in the Matrix, dodging bullets. That's how Roy Jones was in his prime. It was a madness. Colpzilla says, gotta give it to Eubank Sr. He did have like 20 defenses. He is decent. Yeah, 20 defenses against, for the most part, obscure opponents because he was WBO champion, right? And the WBO was not a universally recognized sanctioning body back then. The WBO back then, when Eubank Sr. had it, was viewed in the same way that the IBO is viewed today. So they had a lot of obscure fighters in their ranks, the WBO back then. And that's who Eubank Sr. was fighting. Obscure people that you've never heard of before most of the time. You know what I mean? So when they say 20 defenses, yeah, but 20 defenses against a lot of puddings and the occasional good fighter. Just being real. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk for the super chat. It says, salute Hatman. Are the Fury fans the worst in your experience? Just had a long debate with 3 soy boys. Ain't easy, but someone's got to do it. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. No, I would still say, historically, the Mike Tyson fans are the worst. Like the real hardcore Mike Tyson fans, it's literally a cult that has endured for decades. So I would say historically the Mike Tyson fans are the worst. But of recent times, yeah, you could say the Fury fans are the worst of recent times, but it weren't that long ago that the Deontay Wilder fans were really bad. You know, the PBC cult with all the Wilder nonsense. So, but yeah, I would say of the last 3 or 4 years, the Fury fans have been the worst. Shout out to Fight Sport Talk over in New Zealand. Ryan Emus says, it's a shame how Roy destroyed his legacy. Yeah, it is a shame. If only he'd retired after he beat John Ruiz, he would still be spoken about next to Sugar Ray Robinson and a couple of others as a candidate for greatest fighter in history, pound for pound. But because he came back down to light heavyweight, he had the first Tarver fight, which was competitive. And you see, if you watch that first Tarver fight, I don't think it was controversial, right? Because at the time people were saying, oh my gosh, did Roy Jones just lose his first fight? He had this razor close contest against Tarver. But if you actually watch it now, I think Roy Jones won that fight legitimately. Yeah, it was competitive, but I think Roy Jones won the fight. But people were so used to Roy Jones being totally dominant and nobody winning a minute of a round against him that they were hyper-focusing on the success that Antonio Tarver had in that first fight and giving him a bit more credit during rounds than he actually deserved. And so that's where this narrative came from that, you know, Tarver maybe beat him, and nah, I think Roy Jones won that first fight. But then the controversy, of course, led to the rematch, and we know what happened there. Roy Jones got knocked out by Tarver in round 2, big left hand, all over. And that was, the start of his legacy being ruined, fighting on for far too long. I mean, you have to imagine that a lot of it was to do with money problems for Roy Jones, because even though Roy Jones was a phenom, he never made the money of a Mike Tyson, a Lennox Lewis, etc., etc. For much of Roy Jones' career, a lot of people don't realize this, he was actually pretty much a free agent, independent. He didn't like signing long-term contracts with promoters. He actually paved the way, believe it or not, for what Mayweather would later go on to do. You know, where he would just sign one-fight deals for specific fights, often with Golden Boy, you know? But he was a free agent, Mayweather, for the latter stages of his career when he made all his big money. Roy Jones tried to do that, but he was nowhere near as successful commercially, because basically all the big promoters ganged up against him. They don't like an independent guy trying to be independent, particularly somebody who's as talented as Roy Jones. So, Jones, he made a few mil in his career, but he never made the crazy purses that some of the big stars of the sport were making. The likes of, again, Mike Tyson, Holyfield, Lewis. These are heavyweights, of course. That's why he wanted to fight the heavyweights, because he wanted to try and make them kind of purses. Let me just reset things here. The chat's always going to crash a couple times, as it has here. I've got it open again. Hold tight. Iron Mike, well, judging by your name. He says, I'm part of the Mike Tyson cult, I won't lie. Darry says, man, Eubank was training in the Bronx in the mid-80s, late 80s as a British black guy. In those times in New York, must have been quite murky. Yeah. Eubank Sr., despite his flamboyance and eccentricity, is a very tough man. He's very resilient. You had to be, being a British guy in the Bronx in the 80s. I mean, Americans tend to have this perception that British people are soft even now. Imagine what it was like in the 80s. Before the internet and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people in America didn't even realize there were black people in Britain. That's how insular America was back then, before the time of the internet. So that it would just blow their mind to hear a black guy coming out with a British accent. All they could relate it to would be like, I don't know, the butler Jeffrey in The Fresh Prince. Yeah. Fresh Prince wasn't around then, of course, in the late 80s. Fresh Prince was the 90s, right? But you get the idea. Mr. Grandy says, my favorite boxer of all time was a Jamaican boxer by the name of Mike The body snatcher McCallum, his greatness is widely underappreciated. Yeah, I did a special on Mike McCallum. Actually, no, I did a special on Julian Jackson on my Patreon, where I did a film study about the build-up to Julian Jackson versus Gerald McClellan, one of the great middleweight shootouts. And of course, Julian Jackson's first big step up, because he had a padded record, was against Mike McCallum. And Mike McCallum took him apart. That was probably the biggest all-Caribbean world title fight, maybe of all time. Obviously, there have been many Caribbeans that have fought each other, but I'm talking about in terms of people that were born and raised in the Caribbean. Mike McCallum from Jamaica and Julian Jackson from the Virgin Islands. It was like an all-Caribbean affair. Julian Jackson, padded record, big puncher, but came up against Mike McCallum, who had all the skills. He did actually hurt Mike McCallum with a left hook in that fight. But McCallum came back to, do poor old Julian Jackson in. And he was a great fighter, Mike McCallum. You know, when he knocked out Donald Curry with a tremendous left hook. At 154, McCallum was a massive problem. He had the great fights with James Toney, both close fights. Black Dynamite says, why did a lot of Caribbean bricks like Slick Rick and Eubanks even go to New York in the 80s? I think a lot of it was naivety. Yeah, a lot of it was naivety. But in the case of Eubank Jr., it worked. I mean, Eubank Sr., it worked. Because you're taking somebody from what you perceive to be a hostile environment with bad influences, and you're sending them to somewhere that's even more dangerous. Right? How's that going to work out? With Slick Rick, he obviously made a career for himself, became a famous rapper and made a lot of money, but at the same time, he got dragged down into the street stuff because a cousin of his, you might not know this, but Slick Rick went to prison for shooting his own cousin. His cousin, in New York, obviously, was a dangerous individual, very dangerous. And so Slick Rick ended up shooting him because this guy was threatening Slick Rick's life and saying he was going to, end his life and so on and so forth. So Slick Rick shot him before the cousin could shoot Slick Rick. Went to prison for that, actually recorded an album. Was it one album or two albums that Slick Rick recorded from prison? I forget now. But yeah, Slick Rick was from Wimbledon, which is a nice part of southwest London. So why would you move? I guess it was his mum. I'm not sure if it was his dad too. From Wimbledon, a nice part of southwest London, to the Bronx in NYC in the 80s. Seems insane, but there you go. I think a lot of naivety. Jazz says, man did a cartel in jail. He did indeed. And, Slick Rick was really big in hip hop in, the 1980s, early 90s. So he's really at the top of his career when he ended up going to prison. Again, like Vybz Kartel many years later. King says, who wins between Chavez Jr. and Jake Paul? Jake Paul should win. Chavez Jr., inactive, weight bully, been out the ring for a long time, bunning herbs and living his best life as a millionaire brat or son of a millionaire brat. Jake Paul should be able to beat him. Triple R says, Teddy Atlas still tells those old tea and crumpets jokes, but most of the young Americans seem to have more respect for Brits nowadays. Yeah, because there's more cross-pollination of culture with the internet now. You get a lot more Americans, particularly black Americans, visiting Britain these days, even moving to Britain. There's a lot of that goes on now, so there's more of an understanding. There's a cross-pollination when it comes to music, etc., etc. But there still is the general perception among Americans that Brits are softer than they are. That general perception still exists. It's not as extreme as it used to be, but it still exists. Jazz says, Americans will never like British rap though. Most of them, not really, but there are a lot of collaborations now between UK rappers and American rappers. You know, Giggs has done collaborations and many other artists have done these collabs. So there are some American rappers that like UK rap. But as far as UK rap being popular in America, Iron Mike says Central C is blowing up in America. Is he? Yeah, I doubt the general American public will ever take to UK rap like that. I doubt that, but, you know, it's definitely a lot more popular among American artists than it used to be back in the days. Because there are quite a few American artists that actually like UK rappers. Kayvon Green says, does UK have a gangster culture? Yes. Pretty much every big city that you can go to in the world has got gangsters. And the UK is no different. Yeah, there are gangs in the UK, etc., etc. Always has been. But from the 20th century on, I mean, a city like London, for example, has got so many different types of gangs: Turkish gangs, Albanian gangs, Pakistani gangs, black gangs. Black Dynamite says that they still have those Cockney gangs like the ones from Snatch. Not so much these days. Not so much these days. Kayvon Green says, but no guns. Like, how are they doing it? Oh, they've got guns. They've got guns. Any serious gang in the UK's got guns. Guns are obviously not as easily accessible in the UK as they are in the United States. Nowhere near. But in the criminal underworld, you can get anything. So, serious gangs and like organized crime, they've got guns. Yeah. Tawheed says, Jarrell Miller is someone who embodies the thug street mentality. From the interviews I've seen, he seems to genuinely think he has an advantage over opponents because he's from Brooklyn. Yeah, that's the the mentality of certain people. They think that coming from a particular environment is going to help them in a boxing ring. And as I've said many times before, it only really helps you if the opponent buys into it. In fact, I remember Roy Jones fought a guy back in the days called David Telesco. And David Telesco was a guy who'd been involved in the streets and he'd been to prison and this and that. And he was actually talking to Roy Jones during the fight. And he asked Roy Jones, and this was picked up by the commentary, by the effects mic in the ring, so you could hear him say it. He kept asking Roy Jones, have you ever been to prison, Roy? And Roy Jones was baffled, like, what's this guy asking me about prison for? In the middle of a boxing match with rules, and I don't know. Obviously, Roy Jones didn't buy into any of that. Roy Jones was never a street guy. He was a country boy. He used to chase chickens and what have you. He didn't need to be a street guy to win all his fights. Do you know what I mean? He had the talent. It was what it was. So it's kind of like, in the cartoon Dumbo, where Dumbo's got the magic feather, and he thinks he needs the magic feather to fly. That's how some people are as far as the environment that they come from. They give themselves confidence by thinking, well, I'm from this tough neighborhood, and I'm going up against somebody who's not from a tough neighborhood, therefore he can't touch me, But you can't bring guns into the ring. You can't bring your gang into the ring. You can't, use a knife in the ring. So I don't see the relevance, but there you go. Jarrell Miller's definitely of that mindset. Shout out to Danny for the super chat. He says, what did you make of Jared Anderson crying? On which occasion? He's cried so many times. Dari says, Hatman, do you rate Pharoah Monch? I was never really a big fan. I did have his first album, which I think was called Internal Affairs. And before his first album, he was part of a group called Organized Confusion. They released, I think, 2 or 3 albums. Richard Heath says, I'm from Wandsworth. Hatman, you sound like you are too. No, I'm from Brixton. Kayvon Green says, disagree because people from inner city have a viciousness about them. Yeah, but you can have a viciousness about, well, I'm from the inner city, right? I grew up in a tough neighborhood, tough environment, and I grew up in a boxing gym too. And a lot of the guys who were killers, shooters, back in the days when I grew up in the UK, there was a lot more guns because this was before an incident, a mass shooting event that happened in the UK in the late 90s. After that incident, they tightened up the gun laws extremely. But before that incident, there was a lot more guns on the street. So that's the environment I grew up in South London, Brixton, those times. So shootings were a regular thing. In Brixton, people get shot all the time. But a lot of the gangsters, a lot of the tough guys on the street who would shoot you and who would stab you and this and that, they were scared to fight in a one-on-one against somebody who could actually fight. A lot of them had a bully mentality. If they didn't have weapons and they had to fight somebody in a one-on-one, they don't want to fight. And some of them who were delusional enough to think that they could really fight, I'm not going to name names, but there was a notorious Brixton gangster who came down to the gym, Miguel's gym in Brixton. And he got in the ring to spar a Nigerian student. This kid was in university, all right? And this gangster gets in the ring. This guy shot people and everything. And he got knocked out, like cold, by a Nigerian university student who could actually box, right? So, yeah, you can have a vicious mentality if you're from a certain environment. But if you can't fight, you can't fight. And, sometimes you also get guys who are so used to being bullies because of their mouth in the ghetto. When they come up against somebody who isn't intimidated by them, all of a sudden they get shook. An example of that would be Zab Judah, right? Zab Judah from Brownsville. Look how Zab Judah behaved. He would always have a meltdown. When somebody started getting the better of Zab Judah in the ring, he'd always have a meltdown. He couldn't take it when somebody was able to stand up for him. When he got knocked out by Costa Zoo, he felt so embarrassed because in his mind, I'm from the hood. I'm from Brownsville. This guy from Russia/Australia, he's not from a tough hood. He shouldn't be able to beat me. And he got wiped out in 2 rounds. Do you know what I mean? So a lot of guys from the inner city put too much stock. They put too much confidence in being from that environment when it comes to boxing. You can't bring your weapons with you. It's a sport with rules and a referee and, you know, sometimes people rely too much psychologically on coming from the inner city as far as boxing. Muhammad Ali didn't come from the inner city. Muhammad Ali came from a middle-class two-parent family. Yes, it was in the deep south and there was racism and all that, but Ali didn't grow up in poverty. And he was one of the toughest, most vicious guys you've ever seen in the ring. You know, so, yeah, a lot of that tough neighborhood stuff, over the years I've learned that it doesn't mean as much as because I used to believe all that stuff too. You know, when I was a young kid growing up, I used to have that kind of mentality at one point. But I reached a certain age and I was like, it's not really all it's cracked up to be as far as boxing goes. You don't need to come from a ghetto or anything like that to be a top professional fighter, a world champion, an all-time great. Not at all. I mean, look at Jarrell Miller, right? Where's Miller from? Is he from Brownsville or Bed-Stuy? I'm not sure whereabouts in BK is from. But Jarrell Miller fought Daniel Dubois. Daniel Dubois was basically raised with kid gloves because he's probably on the spectrum, right? Daniel Dubois knows nothing about the street. He's like a child in a man's body. Going into the Miller fight, he probably only just lost his virginity. There's nothing street or hood about Daniel Dubois. Yet he went in there against Jarrell Miller, who is from the street, and he broke him down, beat him up and stopped him. So I think people buy too much into the whole I'm from the hood, so I'm going to be better than you angle, you know? I think that's kind of old now. And that's why Jarrell Miller was so shocked, because he could see how immature Daniel Dubois was and how sheltered he was in life, you know? And he must have been thinking in his head, there's no way this little English kid who knows nothing about the streets, who's been sheltered his whole life, who's naive about the world, there's no way this little kid can beat me. I'm from BK, I'm from the streets. I've got guns in my face, you know? But none of that stuff matters in a boxing ring, bro. So that sheltered little kid can still whoop your behind. Because he's been raised, Daniel Dubois has been boxing since he was like 8 years old. He was raised by his dad to be a professional fighter. Not to be a street guy and any of that stuff, to be a professional boxer. So shout out to Kayvon Green for the super chat. Big up. Yeah, the hood angle used to work a lot better back in the days. In the 80s and the 90s, a lot of British fighters would get intimidated because somebody was from Brooklyn, and you used to see these documentaries on television about the Bronx and Brooklyn and other places, other tough ghettos in the United States. But at the same time, the people who come out of American ghettos today are a different breed. Back in the 60s, And in the 70s, fist fights, fist fighting in the American ghetto was a lot more common than it is now. Yeah? Those black Americans that came up in the 60s and the 70s, they were scrapping more so than they were shooting. So that generation, they were serious with with the knuckle game. And I'm not saying there's no fist fights in, American ghettos now. Obviously there is, but I don't think it's the same as it used to be back in the days when people really used to scrap it out in those times, Kayvon Green says, to be fair, not much of NYC is ghetto anymore. Yeah, NYC is gentrified compared to what it used to be in the 80s. In the 80s, early 90s, NYC was scary. NYC was a jungle. Before Giuliani came through and did what he did, NYC was a jungle. The mob was still laying people down and all kind of different gangs, and the poverty was crazy. The Bronx looked like literally a war zone. I think one of the first deprived areas, maybe the first deprived area that I remember, obviously I'm not from NYC. I've been to NYC, I visited NYC back in the 90s. But the first area that I remember, deprived area in NYC that I remember becoming gentrified was Harlem. Because Harlem is on Manhattan Island, right? And so they tend to, when it comes to gentrification, they tend to start close to the center. So they started gentrifying Harlem first. And then they started gentrifying Brooklyn, and so on and so forth. Now they're gentrifying parts of the Bronx, etc. But yeah, I remember when they started gentrifying Harlem. Shout out to Kayvon Green. He says, once he stopped the fair hopping, it got a lot better. And Giuliani was really hated. The hip hop crowd, the hip hop community really hated Giuliani. He cleaned up the city. Jackie Boy says people back in the days just had it tougher, generally speaking. Yeah, they did. I mean, the 80s and 90s in every Western country was much more dangerous than it is today. Never mind what they tell you on the news. Go look at the stats. Even Chicago, which has got a serious problem with gang violence today, Chicago was worse in the 80s than it is now. Much worse. Much worse. Like the murder rate in Chicago was way higher back in the 80s than it is now. Just to give you some perspective on how crazy it was in the 80s. Places like Detroit is still rough now, but back in the 80s? Oh my gosh. 80s and 90s Detroit, madness. Shout out to Grizz D over there in the grill, Jamaica. Yard man. Yes, yes. Kayvon Green says, what do you think about the Carmel Anthony case? I don't know much about it. I've heard people refer to it. So, for example, I occasionally tune into the Star Report. Troy Terrain, he does his live streams, I guess, like 3 times a week. And I've heard him talk about the Carmel Anthony case, but I haven't really paid that much attention. But I guess you've got opinion on it. What's your opinion on the Carmel Anthony case? Shout out to G-Man in the chat. Black Dynamite says, no way Star still makes videos. That guy's a troll. Yeah. The original troll in the hip-hop community. Yeah, his channel's big. He gets huge numbers on his live streams. In fact, Star's a good example, right? He always talks about this. Star always brags about the fact that he had a great childhood because he wasn't raised in NYC. He's from New Jersey. He's from some little small town in New Jersey. And he was raised in a 2-parent household and he was a spoilt brat. By his own choice, he went to go live in NYC in the 80s. I think he did a little bit of school in NYC in the 80s, and then he moved there. And Star was involved in all kind of crazy stuff. This kid from the burbs in New Jersey went to go live in NYC, and he was involved in shootouts. He shot people. He was involved with the Jamaican gangs and all kind of crazy stuff. And he eventually, of course, made a career for himself in the music industry. He worked for record labels, and eventually he had a show on, well, he wrote for The Source, and then eventually he ended up on radio and television. He had the show Star and Buck Wild. Kayvon Green says, to know where self-defense begin and end. That's in relation to Carmel Anthony. Now, Black Dynamite says, NYC back in the days had a lot of people enamored for some reason. Well, yeah, for a long time, NYC was the most famous city in the world. Everybody wanted to go there. There were so many iconic movies that were made in NYC. So, yeah, NYC achieved an iconic status. I mean, even in the 19th century, right, the 1800s, it was the go-to city for immigrants coming from Europe. Obviously, it's the first big major city they're going to arrive at, coming from across the Atlantic, but still, they wanted to be in NYC. You know, the Irish settled in NYC, the Italians and various other groups in big numbers. So yeah, NYC had an iconic status for a long time, which it's since lost. NYC doesn't have the same power, the same pulling power that it had in the 90s, the 80s, the 70s. I mean, the NYC of today, the equivalent of NYC today would be Dubai. Yeah, the Big Apple. Now Dubai is like the go-to city in the world where all the young people want to go. You know, they all want to go and live this luxury, glamorous life. And so they think they're going to go to Dubai. That seems to be like the go-to city in the world. The most glamorous city is now Dubai. That's where everybody wants to go. Kayvon Green says, NYC is still the #1 city. I guess you're a proud New Yorker. Well, I can tell you that NYC doesn't have the same appeal to people in the UK that it used to have back in the 90s, 80s, 70s. It's not the same. And it doesn't have the same appeal to other people from around the world that it used to have. You don't hear people say, I want to go to NY, I want to move to NY. No, everybody wants to go to Dubai. Like I say, Dubai is the new NY, not in terms of the history, because NY in the 80s and 90s was a dangerous place, but it was a happening place. It's a different day and time now. And yeah, Dubai is the number one place. Everybody wants to go there. Kayvon Green says, really? I would never move to Dubai. Well, it's not for everyone, but I can assure you that a lot of these youngsters now, that's where they all want to go. So many of the rappers go there, and it's just seen as the most glamorous place in the world. And that is what particularly young people are attracted to now. Back in the 80s and 90s, young people weren't so much attracted by glamour. I mean, that was part of the thing that attracted them. But they were just attracted by the city itself, you know? The opportunities in the city. Being able to, you know, it might sound trivial, but being able to go to the places that they've seen in movies and see the steam coming out of the manhole covers in the road and all that kind of thing. So people were attracted to the NY experience back then. But now we live in a much more materialistic world, and people are attracted to luxury. Everybody wants to live a luxury life. Everybody wants to be seen on Instagram looking like they're rich. And so the best place to stunt and pretend that you're rich for the gram is Dubai. That's where they all go to act like they're rich. Dr. Wu says partly because NYC hip-hop fell off. Yeah, NYC hip-hop fell off a long time ago. The South took over and NYC lost its identity musically. Now you got these NYC rappers sounding like they're from down south. Internet Tough Guy says, nah, you're wrong. The rich head to Dubai because of tax exemption. I never spoke about the rich heading to Dubai. I never said anything about the rich heading to Dubai. I'm talking about young people. And I've lived in Dubai. I lived in the Middle East for over 2 years. I lived out there before most people in the West even knew about Dubai. So I know about that area very, very well. And the majority of young people want to go live out there because of the glamorous image. This is what they want to be part of. Black Dynamite says, I think Miami comes close. In terms of American cities, Miami still has some type of glamour to it outside of the US because of the whole libertarian movement. You know, a lot of those libertarian guys who are popular. You got podcasts like Fresh and Fit that are based in Miami. So because of that, there's still an element of glamour about Miami from the perspective of outsiders. But NY doesn't have it anymore. LA doesn't have it. It's all Dubai, Dubai, Dubai now. Internet Tough Guy says, how was that? You mean living in Dubai? It was great. But as I say, I lived there before it became as popular with Western people as it is now. So back when I lived there, it had a slightly more of a family vibe. And there wasn't as many people from Europe and America there. It wasn't quite as busy. It was cheaper as well back when I lived there. I think I lived there during the best time, at least for me. Now, it'd be far too busy and far too chaotic and hectic for me. But yeah, I lived there for 2 and a bit years in Dubai. I was in Abu Dhabi for a bit, in Qatar, in Bahrain. So I moved about, and it was good. But personally, I prefer Doha, which is the capital of Qatar. I prefer Doha to Dubai. Quieter, cheaper, and if luxury is your thing, every bit as luxurious, right? Black Dynamite says London is dead too. Yeah, London's heyday was like in the 60s. If we're talking about in the past 100 years or whatever, London's heyday was in the 60s. You know, the swinging 60s with the Beatles and Carnaby Street and all that type of stuff. Yeah, the 60s was London's heyday. The 90s, London had a little bit of a revival. But it was really the 60s that was the Beatles era. That was the London heyday. That's when London was really seen as a go-to city, even for people outside of the UK. They wanted to visit London because of the bands, the groups that were coming out of the UK at the time, you know? Beatles ain't even from London, but still. The original British invasion back in the 60s, going into the 70s, with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, of course, and so many other groups that followed them. These rock bands. But yeah, now London is dead. London is overly dead at this point. All right, peeps, gonna wrap this one up. Shout out to everybody who participated in the conversation. Special shout out to everyone who donated via Super Chat. Make sure you guys take care of yourselves. And I'll see you on the other side. I'm out.